Mate, what's going on this week? Welcome to this episode of the Exponential Performance Podcast. My name's Matty Graham, and it is so good to have you here. In this week's episode, EPC coach Nick Taylor talks about calories, and I take a look at recovery. What is recovery? What are we trying to recover from, and how can we do it better? Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Exponential Performance Podcast. Join sports scientist and performance coach Matty Graham to find out how to train smarter and maximize your performance no matter who you are.
Welcome along to episode 38 of the Exponential Performance Podcast. I hope your week's off to a good start and your training is going well. Now, after episode 38, I had a lot of questions coming at me about the Ride Strong program that I mentioned in the podcast when we were talking about the strength training question. Now, the Ride Strong program is a strength training program specifically for cyclists. And I've had a lot of people ask me, is it for mountain bikers? Can mountain bikers use it? Can road cyclists use it? What about triathletes, track cyclists? The answer, I guess, is yes, in short. It's designed to help develop cyclists' ability on the bike, both directly by increasing the force production of the specific muscle groups involved in cycling, but also indirectly as well in the early training phases by developing a more structurally robust body, evening out some imbalances that often cyclists get, so they're able to train harder on the bike without getting the injuries that often crop up in cyclists as far as knees, lower backs, aching upper back and shoulders, that sort of thing. If you want to check out Ride Strong, you can get a free inside preview of it. All you've got to do is go over to exponentialperformancecoaching.com/Ride Strong, and you can get a free preview of that, a bit of an inside look, so you can see what it's all about. If you've got any other questions about that, feel free to send them through. What I want to do now is we are going to cross over to EPC coach Nick Taylor, and he's going to talk to you about calories. So without further ado, Nick, take us away.
Hey team, Nick back here again this week. Please excuse my absence last week from the podcast, but it is certainly good to be back with you. Now today I wanted to carry on what we've been talking about around nutrition and follow on from the last conversation we had around protein and the amount of protein we need to look at sort of total calories. Now, total calories is essentially every gram of food that you consume in a day to keep your body going from a normal body function point of view, but also to sustain the exercise that you're putting out. And whether or not you are looking to lose some weight, you might be looking to gain weight, or just looking to maintain. Now, we note on those three different sort of categories, a lot of athletes that I come across tend to try and lose weight as they get closer to their race day. Now, the best approach would be to work out what your optimal weight would be, and that can be a subjective thing. We all have a sort of a number in our mind of what we'd like to weigh, but sometimes that's not actually the best number for us. And a good example of that is myself. When I was doing Ironman triathlon almost 10 years ago now, I was about 75 kgs, 4 or 5% body fat, and I was sick all the time. Always had a chronic infection. I was training all right, and my race went well, but it wasn't a good weight for me. I looked skinny, I looked a little bit sick, and like I said, I was always sick. So scan that forward to now, sort of sitting in that kind of 85 bubble, and probably up around 15-16% body fat, and I look a lot better, a lot more muscle tone, and I'm not sick, with the exception of last week, which is why I wasn't here. I picked up a stomach virus, but there is always a number in our head And I think that's a good option to talk to someone in the field of nutrition to actually get a proper gauge on where a good number for you is. And it might just take a little bit of trial and error, but most of us know roughly when we're at a good weight, what that weight is for training and also for racing. But certainly during the race period of the year is not a great time to be losing weight. You want to be losing weight and getting to that kind of optimal range through your off season, and then looking to maintain through your race or training in season block, and maybe just losing half a kg or a kg closer to race time. The trouble is, if you lose too much weight going into race time, you can also lose muscle mass, but also your fueling is compromised for some of your key training sessions. So how do we work out how many calories we need? There's a bunch of different online calculators that can be kind of beneficial. Some of the apps, in terms of the food diet apps, are good as well. And it's always just a rough number. Most of the time they ask you how many sessions per week you do and how intense they are, and then base that on your body weight and your height. So it's a rough calculation, and no one should ever stick to it religiously. It's impossible to monitor your food religiously down to the nearest gram, and also it's impossible to get a very good, accurate reading on your caloric outputs without being in a caloric chamber, as they call them, which is basically a sealed box where you live in, and they collect all the gases that you breathe in and out, and they'll give you basically a pinpoint number. Now, a good place to have a quick look at that is on calculator.net, and find the calorie calculator, or calculator.net/calorie-calculator, and then input your details, and it'll give you like I said, a rough estimation of what you need. So when I look at my details, I need approximately 3,200 calories per day to maintain my weight. And now I know from some of the other stuff I've done, that's a pretty much ballpark figure. I tend to aim for around the 3,000 mark. So that's pretty good. Now, when we look at the makeup of that calorie or caloric intake for the day, each different macronutrient has a different caloric value. So 1 gram of carbohydrate provides 4 calories. 1 gram of protein provides 4 calories as well, and 1 gram of fat provides 9 calories. So automatically we can see that a fat gram is a lot more dense than a carbohydrate or protein. Now, also probably the most easiest thing to understand from this conversation, and it's the only thing you take away, that a calorie in versus a calorie out is the biggest component of weight loss. So if you're consuming 3,000 calories a day and you're outputting 2,500 calories a day, you're going to put on weight. If you're consuming 3,000 calories a day and outputting 3,500 calories a day, you're going to lose some weight. And if you're consuming about the same as what you are outputting, then you're going to maintain that weight. So it doesn't matter how you make it up, whether you're low carb, high protein. At the end of the day, that the calories in versus the calories out is still the most important component of weight management. Now, when we take that conversation a little bit further and look at how those macronutrients are split up within that total caloric intake, we look at things called like macronutrient manipulation. So we remember back to a couple of weeks ago, I said about 1.6 to 1.8 grams of protein per kg of body weight per day is a really good level for an endurance athlete to be maintaining muscle, keeping hormones, and keeping the immune system going. So we'll use my example of 3,000 calories a day. If I was consuming 1.8 grams of protein per kg, I'd be consuming approximately 20% of my total calories from protein. Now, how I got there was 1.8 grams of protein times 4, because 4 calories per 1 gram of protein. And then I times that by my body weight, and I end up with 576 calories worth of protein for the day. So I divide that by 3,000 and get 20%, or 19.2, but we'll round it up to 20. So often when you will see people prescribe a level of fat or carbohydrates, they will look at a percentage for the day. So it tends to be people on the low carb, high fat, or the ketogenic end of the spectrum will be looking at things like 80% fat for total calories. Some of them might go to 60%, and obviously you've then got 20% worth of protein. So for someone on a ketogenic diet, if I was to be following a ketogenic diet and I was having 20% protein, 80% fat, then I've got no room for carbs. So I'd have to drop my protein values. And so I wouldn't be happy doing that. So I'd have to drop my fat values and break it up that way. So it does become a bit of a science. People in the lower fat category and consuming a high carb, they might even go as high as 60% carbohydrates, 20% protein, 20% fat. And that would be more of the typical historic kind of endurance athlete diet that we're now starting to see sort of challenged by some of the literature. But it doesn't mean it's wrong. And that's I guess the fantastic part about the nutritional field is there's so many different approaches. At any given stage, one might work for you, and then 10 years later it doesn't, as your body's starting to change. So I do encourage you to have a look at some readings if you can, or get in touch with a nutritionist in your region, get in touch with me, get in touch with Maddie, and we can look at some of those figures for you, just so you have a good understanding of where you need to be. I do want to point out that you can undereat, and you can undereat quite badly. So if you're trying to lose weight and you say drop your 3,000 calories a day to 2,000, so you're undereating by 1,000 calories a day, over the course of a couple of weeks, you're going to find that you slow up very quickly, and that you start to feel pretty crap. Your energy levels are going to plummet. Your hormone levels will plummet eventually too, and you're not going to be able to output what you want to be doing. So when you get into that stage, you can certainly overtrain pretty quickly. Your body's going to become overstressed, and when it becomes overstressed from not eating enough, it basically goes into a starvation mode. And your body thinks, right, I need to store the food that I'm putting in. So then next time he decides to starve me, I've got enough resources to cover that. So you'll put on weight. So although you're under eating, your body will start to store fat. And it starts to store fat in that generally in their stomach regions, especially for males. And that can be the case with what I call the overweight endurance athlete. Now, I've tried to segue myself quite nicely with framing that up, so hopefully it's flowed all right. But the overweight endurance athlete is a phenomenon that is quite dear to my heart, because I have probably been in that situation myself a couple of times when I've tried to do events when I haven't been fully prepared. But also when I stand and watch the start of Ironman and Challenge Wanaka, even in Taupo and the likes, even some mountain bike endurance races and so forth, there is generally a bunch of people that are overweight for what they're trying to do. Now, I do have to point out that I'm not referring to the person that's lost 50 kgs to get to the start line and is doing this as a goal event. That they're trying, they tried to lose some weight, they got to their goal weight, and they're doing the event. I think that's fantastic, and that's why the sport is as successful as it is. I'm referring to the person that's training 15, 20 hours a week. They're racing on the best gear, and they're a little bit overweight, a little bit chubby, especially around the stomach, like I said. These tend to be people that have either been overtraining, they're overstressed in life, whether it be from work, from family, or from overtrained, which has already been mentioned. And then they're either eating too much or they're not eating enough. And it's really hard to know until obviously you sit down and look at their diaries. But not eating enough is a huge component of it, or eating too much of the wrong stuff. So tends to be either really high carb and not enough fat, that they haven't allowed themselves the hormone side of things, or they're starving the body from some of those good fats and good proteins, or like I said, they're under eating for the amount of volume that they're putting out. 15 to 20 hours a week is quite a high volume of training. When you then add 40, 45 hours of work, for people with families, you've got families going on as well. So there's a whole spectrum on there, and I could probably write a book, and one day maybe I will. There's a good goal for myself for the year. But I do think nutrition is a simple thing to get right. You just need a little bit of helping hand and a plan, I guess. So we all go out with a plan for our training. We never go out with a plan for our nutrition. So get in touch with someone that can help you get the numbers right, get a spectrum for what that looks like. You may only have a consult with someone, or you might get some help for 2 or 3 weeks, especially in that off season, just so you're getting your numbers right, you're getting the quantities of food right, and you're getting an idea of how to manipulate things if they're not going right for you. Let's say you have an injury and you need to drop numbers back, or you've got a high volume of training coming up, you need to step things up and so forth. So that's where a nutritionist can really help. Just get you in a framework where you can basically have the tools to manipulate things yourself. And I think a lot of us can benefit from that in our training and in our racing. So that's it from me this week, folks. If you do have any questions, nutrition or otherwise, that you would like to throw to me, jump on to the website and record them as the voice questions. Feel free to leave any comments for me, and I will see you guys all next week. Bye.
Well, I hope you learned something about calories and energy intake and how that applies to your training. Like Nick said, if you've got any questions for him, make sure you hit him up and ask them. So what I want to talk about now is something that is talked about a lot in the training world. It's talked about a lot, but I don't often think it's very well understood or practiced very well, and that is recovery. Now, when I mentioned the term recovery, a lot of athletes run for the hills, quite literally, because they think it's going to decrease their performance. They just want to keep smashing out those training sessions, and the recovery aspect doesn't really fit into their concept of what training is. Now, before we jump into recovery, I want to talk about the training equation. Now, the training equation is the nuts and bolts, if you like, the very basics of programming of performance. And it is that improved performance, whatever that may look like in your world, is training stress, the appropriate training stress, plus recovery equals improved performance. So you cannot have improved performance by solely doing the training that's required for that performance. You must couple it with recovery. Now, a lot of people don't really pay particular attention to recovery. It's just something that's hoped that it will happen by default. But if you're really interested in training smarter, addressing the recovery side of the equation is really important as well, rather than just leaving it to chance. So I bet that 99% of the people listening to this understand that recovery is important, but a lot of people aren't recovering the way that reflects the importance of recovery. So what are we actually trying to recover from? Well, during times of recovery, the key things that we're trying to recover from, and this depends on our training, is we're trying to balance out the stress hormones of the body. We're trying to get some neuromuscular regeneration, so that's the nerves and the muscles and those connections that connect the two. We're trying to refuel muscle glycogen, so that's the fuel that's in the muscle. And then obviously there's the repair of muscle tissue, which a lot of people understand and think about. There's also the production of new cells within the body and new structures within the body, such as red blood cells. And also, not only the physical side of recovery, but also the mental side of recovery is very, very important too. That recovery time allows the refreshment of the mind. So all of these things require complete recovery to happen. So I just want to talk about two things. I want to talk about complete recovery and active recovery, and then I want to talk about how to integrate this into our training. So complete recovery. Now, complete recovery, a lot of people, this is the only recovery they think about when they hear the word recovery. Now, complete recovery is laying on the couch doing nothing. Most athletes who are trying to balance work, family and training don't usually have this luxury, and the complete recovery aspect of their training just becomes in the removal of their training from an already busy day. So if you don't train that day, they're more happily able to get some recovery because they're not trying to juggle that with everything else I've got going on. Now, many people think that full-time athletes or professionals, whatever you want to call them, those that have a lot more time, they think they're better or able to train more and harder because they have more time to train. What I'd say is most people that have a 9-to-5 job would be able to cram a similar amount of training into their week as some of these full-time athletes. Whether it be training in the morning early, training at lunchtime, and then training again in the afternoon, you're probably going to be able to juggle a 40-hour work week with a 40-hour training week, which is often, 40 hours is often, the number that a lot of elite endurance athletes throw around as their peak loading weeks. And, it is a peak loading week for most of them, and often they won't be training that much all the time. But most people would be able to juggle that in terms of the time. So it's not so much that elite athletes have more time for training, they have more time for recovery. Because if you tried to juggle that stuff as well as work, you'd find you'd get 1, maybe 2 weeks into it if you are very fit and determined, and then you will just crash and burn because your body isn't able to recover. So having that time, elite athletes are able to spend more time recovering without having to, have that recovery being sitting at the desk at work or driving the truck at work or whatever your job requires. You see, the body has 2 branches of the central nervous system. And there's the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight, flight, or freeze response. This happens whenever you're in danger or there's stress on the body. And then there's the parasympathetic nervous system, which I'm pretty sure I've talked about in this podcast before. And this is the rest and digest branch of the central nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is activated whenever the body experiences stress. And whether that's from hard training, or whether that's from a race, or whether that's from a hard, busy day at work, or being up all night with the kids, whatever it might be, the sympathetic nervous system is activated. Now, complete recovery is critical for the body to balance out these 2 branches of the nervous system and to bring that sympathetic nervous system back under control. If you don't have complete recovery, your sympathetic nervous system stays jacked up, adrenaline is high, cortisol is high, and there are major stress hormones, and it leaves you unbalanced. Your immune system gets suppressed, you don't recover, your performance starts to decrease, and usually you end up sick or injured because of this. So complete recovery is important for integration into your training program. Now, on the other side, there is active recovery, and I think active recovery might be one of those things that is often misinterpreted by a lot of people. Some people have an active recovery session planned on their program, and 3 hours later and multiple mountain peaks, they finally think they've finished their active recovery session that was meant to be 45 minutes long and in zone 1. So what is active recovery? Now, the term active recovery, I like to think of it as sport-specific training at a low zone 1 intensity. Now, a lot of people think that this easy zone 1 intensity is a bit of a waste of time, but it is really important as it helps facilitate recovery through increase in blood flow, increase in lymphatic drainage, and our lymphatic system handles the sort of overflow from our circulatory system. So all of our blood vessels, they get a bit leaky. When we train hard, they get even leakier, and our lymphatic system helps return all of that fluid into the bloodstream. Now, the lymphatic system is also really important for our immune system. So by going out, and you will have experienced this, if you go out and you've got sore legs, sore, stiff, tight, heavy legs, and you go out for an easy ride or an easy run, you get home and your legs feel better afterwards. Your legs are sore and tight and tired because of that inflammatory response. There's fluid in the muscles that are pushing on your nerves that make them feel sore and tight. By getting out there and doing some easy exercise, the lymphatic system's able to move all of that fluid out of those muscles back into our circulatory system, and your legs don't feel as tight afterwards. Hallelujah. So active recovery definitely has its place. Also, it helps maintain range of movement, and it's good for a mental recovery. A lot of people, if you're doing, your sport for fun, and I'd hope everyone's doing it for fun on some level. If you're doing it for fun, you like getting out and riding and running and swimming and kayaking and whatever you're into. So by getting out and actually doing some of this, it helps your mental recovery as well. So these active recovery sessions, it's ideal to incorporate technique drills into these, because rather than just going for an easy session, why not incorporate some technique so you're sparking up the neuromuscular system as well. But the really key part of these active recovery sessions is that you finish them feeling fresh and wanting to do more. If, like 90% of the athletes out there, you probably train harder than you are meant to during these active recovery sessions, and you'll end up feeling a little bit tired, and you're unable to complete the then more important, not more important, but just as important, higher intensity training sessions later on, as they're required to, because you've pushed too hard during your active recovery sessions. So there we have two forms of recovery: active recovery and complete recovery. Both of these are really, really important within a training program. Now, there are other things that I like to call recovery modalities, and these are such things as foam rolling, stretching, massage, water therapy, whether that be warm water or cold water in terms of cryotherapy. All of these should be included into a training program, but they don't come under the banner, I guess, of complete recovery or active recovery. Arguably, they could be called active recovery, but I like to call active recovery the sport-specific movement. So whether that be cycling for a cyclist, running for a runner, or, triathlete, whatever you want to do. So I like to keep those recovery modalities separate from our active recovery. So we've got those two meanings hopefully ingrained: complete recovery and active recovery. Now I want to talk about recovery within a training week. I want to talk about recovery days, because this is something that I think often gets confused. Now, the ideal of recovery days within your training is to help facilitate partial recovery. So it's not complete recovery, it's partial recovery. So we've driven ourselves into a bit of a hole with our training, and our recovery days allow us some partial recovery to build back up slightly, but not all the way, and then our next training day is going to hammer us down a little bit more. So on recovery days, the idea of these is to help facilitate recovery, and during these days there should be a combination of complete recovery and some of the integration of those recovery modalities that we just talked about. That was the foam rolling, the stretching, the massage, the water therapy, that sort of thing. Now, normally most athletes would have at least one recovery day per week during a loading phase of their training. What day this is entirely up to you. I tend to use a Friday for most athletes, so they train hard during the week. They have Friday off, freshen up partially before they have a big training weekend. Or alternatively, a lot of athletes seem to use Monday. That works really well as well, because you're able to rest up, recharge partially at the start of the week after your big weekend. Some athletes, I will include 2 recovery days in their loading phases as well. And we'll talk about recovery weeks following this, and we'll talk about how many recovery days you may have in a recovery week. So most athletes would have at least one recovery day per week. But those athletes trying to balance a hectic work and family life, these days might just be better to be taken completely off. So rather than, someone who's working 9 to 5, they've got 2.5 kids at home, whatever it might be, they're trying to juggle all this stuff, rather than a recovery day that includes, rolling session, some hydrotherapy at the pool, I just say take a complete recovery day, because they just need the time. They just need the time to rest up and relax and potentially catch up on other stuff that they haven't been able to do with all the training that they've had going on. So often a complete recovery day is a great thing, because if you start adding in other things they need to do on their recovery day, it just adds more stress. And remember, we talked about stress is stress. Doesn't matter if it's coming from training, from life, or from our recovery modalities that we're trying to squeeze in. However, for those that have time on their recovery days, the time and the energy, I'd suggest a 30 to 45 minute focused recovery session, including some of the recovery modalities that we talked about. And I find that athletes are more able or more likely to complete focused recovery sessions if they have to go somewhere specific to do them. Where's that specific place? Could be the gym, could be the pool, or whatever designated place that might be, whether it be going to the yoga studio or the Pilates studio. But going somewhere and you set your timer, started your watch, I'm going to spend 45 minutes stretching and rolling, and commit to it. Because I find if they say, well, I'm going to do it at home, it doesn't happen. Okay, it doesn't happen. I usually find something else I need to be doing. I don't know about you, but that's me. Find something else. Even things such as washing and dishes seem to take priority over a stretching session. So if you want to take your recovery seriously, I'd suggest make sure you go somewhere specific with the goal in mind that you're going to tick some of these recovery modalities. Gym, hit the mats, do some stretching, or go to the pool, go hit the spa, do some stretching in the spa, check yourself into a yoga class, whatever it might be. I just find that helps. So, the key thing to remember, I guess, with recovery days is the aim of the recovery day is only to allow partial recovery. So don't be overly concerned if you're not feeling 100% fresh following a recovery day. You're not meant to. That's where the aim, I guess, of recovery weeks come in. Now, a recovery week is all about more complete recovery and the balancing of those stress hormones, allowing the body to freshen up, dig yourself out of that hole, so to speak. Now, when I mention the term recovery weeks for people that don't have that much experience with my training or I've just started working with, they start to freak out. They're saying, well, this guy's about to tell me to take a complete week off. And this is not the case. In some cases, I will tell people to take a complete week off. But in most cases, a recovery week is a blend of complete recovery and active recovery, as we outlined earlier on. So what would a recovery week look like? Well, it depends on what period in your training phase you are and your training age and all of those things. But essentially what a recovery week is periods in your training with a decreased training load that incorporate shorter and or less intense training sessions. So your training sessions are going to be shorter and they're going to be easier to allow your body to recover. And those shorter, easier training sessions are active recovery. So this is really important to allow your body to physically and arguably more important mentally to recover from your last loading phase. Now, recovery weeks, I say weeks in a very loose term, they may vary from anywhere from 3 to 9 days, right? And that depends purely on you and the training phase you're in. For some athletes, I like to run a 3-day training, 3-day recovery block, 3 to 4 days every week. So they'll have a really hard 7-day block. Then they have 3 to 4 days where they freshen up before they get back into another 7-day hard training block. So it's not a 2 weeks loading, 1 week recovery, or a 3 week loading, 1 week recovery. We're doing 7 days hard, 3 days easy. Or alternatively, if you go for 2 weeks really hard, and then you may have 5 days of recovery. So you take the working week, so to speak, Monday through Friday, easy, before cracking back into things over the weekend with some higher training loads. So there's no 100% right or wrong way to do this. You know, the old saying there's more than one way to skin a cat is definitely true, but at the end of the day, there's, one basic way to skin a cat, I guess. And this is what training is always based around, is this concept of training stress plus recovery equals improved performance. The one way to skin a cat, the one basic way to skin a cat, is apparently my grandfather used to say, is just to pull the skin off it. There's no really two ways about it. But the way to get the skin off and where to start and where to finish, we'll leave that over to you to imagine. But there is just one basic way. Train hard, recover hard, your performance should improve. So hopefully this here has helped you understand recovery a little deeper. What we're trying to actually recover from, balancing those stress hormones, getting that neuromuscular regulation sorted, refueling our muscles, repairing soft tissue, producing more structures within the body, whether that be red blood cells, muscle fibers, tendon filaments, and also that mental recovery away from the training stress. Sometimes in those recovery weeks, I'll have them structured. I'll tell my athletes that you need to have a complete recovery day this day. You need to have active recovery this long, this hard, on this day, and this day. I want you to do some recovery modalities on this day and this day, and then blah, blah, blah. Other times, what I find is really good is an unstructured recovery week, where I leave the week completely open for them, with the only guidelines is I want you to finish this week feeling fresh and 100% ready to go again. If you are going to get out and train, I want you to keep it short, less than 45 minutes, and easy in zone 1 to 2. And then depending on their work schedule, their family life, they are able to have a mental break from the structure of training, but still get some active recovery in, and the end goal of finishing the week recovered is still ticked off. So there it is. I guess that's recovery in a nutshell. And I guess the bottom line is, if you treat your recovery with as much attention and focus as you do your training, I think you'll be quite surprised at how your performance will improve. And it's not exactly like you have to go out and do lots of hard work. There's no extra hill reps. There's no extra interval sessions. All you've got to do is make some better decisions, and often it just comes down to planning with your recovery, and you'll get those benefits from it. So I think we'll wrap up there. So I hope that has been helpful. Please, if you can, it would be greatly appreciated if you like, share, and leave a review, whatever platform you're listening on. To make it a little bit easier to share some of these podcasts around, I have started putting out some sound bites on both YouTube and SoundCloud. Now, these sound bites are just little excerpts from the podcast that are on a specific topic. This usually are around about 5 minutes long or so. And so then you can maybe send them to your friend that's having a problem. Try doing this. So rather than having to listen to the whole podcast, they can just listen to those small sound bites. Please let me know how you are finding these sound bites. If there are specific episodes or specific topics that you want me to edit and make into sound bites, please post a comment below and let me know which ones of those they are, and I will do my best to get them sorted for you. I am trying to release a couple of those each week along with the podcast, just to make sure there's more content out there. You're getting the content that you're after, that you can use to inform your training so you can train harder, but most importantly, train smarter. I'll talk to you next week.